Hi, my name is Brad Winters. I'm a CFM and a water resources engineer from CDM Smith. I'm also the treasurer from the Virginia Floodplain Management Association. In this session, we're going to talk about FEMA tools and resources. The first presenter is Bradford Hartley. He's going to speak about tools of the trade, leveraging FEMA's flood risk toolbox. Mr. Hartley is a CFM, a GIS professional, and project management professional, and has worked in and around many FEMA tools in his 14 years working on FEMA's floodplain mapping programs. Bradford?
Hello, and welcome everyone to this session of FEMA tools and resources. Really excited to be here today to present to you tools of the trade, leveraging FEMA's flood risk toolbox. My name is Bradford Hartley, and I work for ABS Group, which is a member of the Compass joint venture, which provides technical services to FEMA's risk map program. I've been supporting FEMA's floodplain mapping programs now for over 14 plus years, but it doesn't take long to just realize how massive this program is and the amount of resources it takes to keep it moving, which is partly why it's so critical that we invest in the tools and resources that can make our jobs easier. Today's presentation won't be a technical one, but hopefully informative. I want to basically just kind of outline the evolution of FEMA's floodplain mapping programs, discuss how the programs have grown with technology, talk about some of the early tools that FEMA had released, talk about tools and resources that we have today, and then really provide on a number of tools a snapshot of the tools that are available, what they do, and how you can view them or access them. And then really, what the future holds for us, moving forward, and then wrap it up with some questions and some answers. So since 1979, FEMA's been overseeing the NFIP, so that's given FEMA the responsibility to map flood-prone areas and establish risk zones, which has allowed the NFIP to basically provide flood insurance. Over the years, products have evolved, as you can see here, but also, we've had different goals and metrics in mind that have kept us, moving along the way. So let's talk about a little bit about FEMA's, some of the evolution of the mapping programs. So definitely, early on, we had a lot of paper products. These were flood hazard boundary maps, floodway maps, then kind of moved into what we call now as the flood insurance map, known as the FERM. And then you also had flood insurance studies. Earlier on, you might not have had a flood insurance study. If your community or area just had detailed studies, there's no need to publish a flood insurance study. So, but traditionally now, every community or county has an FIS now accompanying it. So in 2005, FEMA embarked on map modernization. So really a huge step forward in digital mapping. The other thing MapMod was to reduce. FEMA wanted to reduce its paper inventory. So digital mapping was a way to do that. And then we rolled into FEMA's program called Risk Map, which is the program today, which is about credible data, as well as just carrying the torch on digital mapping and flood risk products. So how has technology helped us? Again, MapMod, one of the big things that FEMA wanted to do was really just limit paper distribution, by 50, 75%. FEMA had done some math and figured that would save the program $3 to $5 million annually that could be reinvested in other ways. So how do we do that? So we do that by leveraging GIS technology and spatial data sets, that's digital mapping. Access to just faster internet speeds, right? I mean, just having people having, faster broadband and internet, allowed FEMA to distribute these products digitally. Also being able to automate tools, right? And, help with quality control and provide checkers on this digital data. Has allowed us to also improve these products, and then also getting these products out to communities, right? Before these products would have been mailed, or even later on been accessed on a CD. That hopefully today everyone realizes the ability to be able to go to the MSC and download these products. So these were kind of all seen as FEMA's digital vision. Limiting paper distribution really went into effect October of 2009, which, started to really blaze the trail for all these digital tools that I'm going to talk about soon. So what were some of these early tools? About 10 years ago, I was doing a presentation just like this on some of these early tools that you see here. So we had the, digital flood insurance rate map, and then the database that accompanies that map. We had the FIS and sometimes even Q3 data. Q3 data was basically digitized information off the basically the flood hazard boundary map or whatever map was available, but it really wasn't truly digital mapping where we took cross sections and created water surface elevation tints from that. It was just a digital uplift. Had the FEMA, it's one of FEMA's oldest tools, but FEMA is basically a scaled down version of a firm map so that it is printable. Once we had all this digital data, FEMA realized that it'd be great to have it in one database, which is what we call today the National Flood Hazard Layer. And then FEMA also enabled to get some of these, digital, spatial data sets out there to folks, whether it was in the field or whether you had an internet connection or not. They created a lightweight GIS viewer called the Map Viewer. And this really, these products really laid the groundwork for today. And really most of these products are still available, but have been enhanced. So just want to reminisce a little bit on what some of the older products looked like. We still had the Map Service Center, but we didn't have the availability of downloading maps like we do today. If you did, you had to have an account, which was special to government agencies or community officials. You were able to download the data, but the digital data, but you could not. When I say digital data, I mean the spatial data sets or databases, but you couldn't get the maps necessarily. At the FEMA, it's been enhanced over the years. And FEMA's Map Viewer, right? This was a way for people to consume the digital data, the spatial data sets. Both had a desktop and a web viewer that had some capabilities built in to look up a number of things in layers. So what are some of the resources today? So 2009, that's really when RiskMap took off. Was picking up from map modernization. Coming out of MapMod, we had, it was estimated about 97% of the population had spatial data available. So this is great. And this was really going to lead the way into, not only FEMA providing digital, regulatory and some non-reg products. This has allowed us to create databases, web viewers, software and training tutorials to just really step through people through all of these resources that are available today. So let's spend some time just focusing in on some of the tools that are available that hopefully if you haven't used that you can look further into after this presentation. So the first one is the Map Service Center. This is one that folks probably are most familiar with. It's dated back to 2000s, but you can search by address. But what I want to point out is there's some additional capabilities built into these websites. Usually different links that take you to different areas, but one of the things you can do in the Map Service Center is search by a specific product ID, whether that be a firm panel number or a LOMA or LOMAC, or even a jurisdiction. So that becomes very powerful, and you can download these products in bulk, whether it's the county database, the NFHL state database, or even just historic maps. You can get access to all that. So if you do decide that you want to search by, state, county, municipality, you can get a ton of additional options. I did this screen cap, kind of pulled together some images of what Cook County had available in Illinois. You can see there's a ton of effective, there's some preliminary products going on, stuff that's going effective, that's not effective yet. You got historic products, and then you got the flood risk products there. So got a lot of options to basically drill down and download and view all of these products. Another thing that has been critical to the program is these risk products. So water surface elevation grids, which have always been part of the program, as well as depth grids, but FEMA now standardizing these products and making them part of active studies has been great. These are stored, again, you can access them on the Map Service Center, but just realize these products are not for all studies, but are coming online more and more. One of the greatest advantages to the depth grids is, being able to, as you can see at that center graphic, is just really be able to determine where the flooding happens, and then, or the estimated flooding could be, and what the depth of that flooding is estimated for. And that's usually done for a number of flood frequency or flood events. Another tool is the Flood Risk Study Engineering Library. This is a great way that, once a project is done, FEMA has allowed the public now to, within, when we wrap up a project, we have to submit this technical data to the MIT for archiving. And now we have a way to access that information. One of the really critical pieces of why this tool is so powerful is if you want to download that model, you can search for it and download it. And again, some of the earlier studies in the program, you might not be able to download a model for, or some technical data, but it's pretty much standard across all the more recent ones. So FEMA also has released an open FEMA data portal, or not really portal, but a way to download data sets. So this is providing a lot of different pieces of information. These pieces of data, FEMA, or data sets, FEMA considers the high value ones. But you can see it ranges, I counted them, there's 34 different data sets ranging from a number of items or areas that you can download data from, which is great. I will make mention, if you recall, one of the data sets you can download is the claims data. This data, I think 2 years ago when it was released, might have been over 1 million records. I think today it's increased to over 2 million, which is more than Excel can crunch. So there is directions for how users can access this data in different ways, as well as if your organization has access to GIS software or other applications like Microsoft Power BI or Tableau, you can basically crunch this data in its full capacity. Another add-on, I think, to the open data is this data visualization site. So, some of the same data sets that you could download, FEMA's already taken the liberty of creating kind of a nice interactive, filterable site where you can kind of get some high-level stats for certain areas. So this is mostly on historic flood risks and costs related to disaster, and includes information about disaster declarations. Another site that you can find information is the flood insurance analytics reports and data. You can access claims information and loss, and do this at a community level if needed for some things. So declared disasters search function, been around for a while, pretty generic, but you are able to drill down into some of these disasters, and for the bigger ones, you can access additional information such as preliminary damage assessments. So if you want to get access on what maybe some high level individual assistance or public assistance funding had been allocated, you can search that. Another two tools, nothing fancy here, but if you want to know what the status is of a LOMAC, you can use the status of map change requests tool, as well as, maybe just seeing what's going on with the current mapping project in your area. You can also access FEMA's flood hazard determination notice tool, which, whenever there's effective regulatory mapping going on, this is your, public notice 90-day appeal period. So if you want to know what the status is for a project in your area, you can use this tool and search that. So another very popular tool is FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer. They have this in a viewer. So I won't spend too much time on this because I know it's going to be talked about later on in the next following presentation, but very powerful tool. One thing I wanted to point out, they have added the format capability into the tool, which is great, but and what you'll notice is a lot of the viewers for FEMA products is at the very bottom. And you can see here in this image, I've created an oval for it, but there's a tab. And if you hit that tab, it basically allows you to view attribute information. With that, you can pull that up and you can see here, there's a whole host of spatial layers that make up the National Flood Hazard Layer. So cross sections, the DFEs, the structures, the floodplain boundaries, all that, you can access. And, you can go below that and, where that blue bar is, you can actually set definition queries. So if you want to filter on certain things or just view stuff that's in the current view extent, you're able to do that. So it's a little tips and tricks I wanted to show you. It could be helpful for some activities that you support. Another helpful tool is the flood map changes viewer. Again, this is very informative to folks when there is an ongoing mapping project. Preliminary data gets released. You want to see, okay, well, how is this going to impact me? It's basically going to allow you to view what the preliminary data is versus the effective, and you can see what the changes are. So FEMA also has a GIS portal and hub page. Going to have the same kind of feel to the National Flood Hazard Layer, where people have hosted applications and web maps on all sorts of different types of data. Not all of it is authoritative, so I would just advise you to kind of use it at your own risk, but it is a great way to access GIS information or even download it and consume it in your own application. So a recent tool FEMA release is the National Risk Index. I encourage you, if this tool has some interest to you, that there is another ongoing presentation for this that you can find it and hopefully view it later or attend it. But it basically looks at the expected annual losses, social vulnerabilities, and community resilience of communities, or I should say counties and basically census blocks across the country. I looked at 18 natural hazards and ranks information among them. So this was a very new tool. I know it had a lot of collaboration from multiple partners and agencies. So definitely check it out. It can be a very helpful tool in hazard mitigation planning. FEMA has a coordinated needs management strategy viewer. This tool takes information from what you might see on a firm map, such as what the stream, flooding source name is, what the zone type is. Takes information from the FIS, such as what type of modeling was used for that study, maybe the date of the analysis, and really stitches it or brings it into or attributes to a stream centerline, which becomes very helpful for basically to get a quick snapshot or quick oversight of what that stream is and the information behind it. Also allows FEMA to evaluate streams every 5 years to see or assess the validity of the modeling, and the results of that is stored in this database, which now is presented online as a viewer for folks. FEMA has a national building adoption tracking portal. Again, pretty straightforward. Viewer, if wanting to know what building codes have been adopted for a specific area, you can do that through this viewer. It is updated and does contain certain specific notes that could be helpful. So, you can search or you zoom to certain areas to find more information. FEMA has also just released this community engagement prioritization tool. Not only is it got some dashboard functionality, but it's also could be considered a decision support tool. It can be customized to your preferences. There's a number of indicators that folks can choose that are predefined that really help you prioritize communities or geographies based on risk, opportunity, interest, and need. So if this tool interests you more, I know there's definitely another in-depth presentation going on about this that you can attend and find more about it. So moving on to kind of our last topic is FEMA also does produce software. So it's typically a lot of data or viewers, but software is something FEMA does have and does maintain. The most widely known one is FEMA's HAZA software. It started back in 1997, and it is a software that is public but does require access to ArcGIS. desktop software, but if you do have access to it, you can load it up, and it's going to provide you estimated economic and structural losses for a number of natural hazards, flood being one of them. About a year ago, 2 years ago, FEMA did release a number of hazardous training software videos to really walk you through using the software. So I encourage you to check those out. But FEMA also realizes not everyone has access to ArcGIS, and so that they have made available some open source tools, such as the flood assessment structure tool, which will rapidly assess structure-specific flood losses using open source Python. And there's also a hazardous export tool where if you do have access to what they call as a hazardous HPR file, which contains all the information about the economic losses or structural losses, you can actually extract out information from that, being shape files or tables or even nice PDFs reports. So last thing I'm going to cover is FEMA's benefit cost analysis toolkit. This is an Excel plugin to where if you're doing or trying to weigh the benefits of a hazard mitigation project, you can input the data here, and it will crunch some numbers and provide you a nice little report readout that you can track one project or many. So I advise you to, if that's something that interests you, check this tool out if you're not already using it. All right, so that was a quick snapshot of a lot of tools. Hopefully some of them, if you haven't visited in a while, maybe check them out, see some of the additional functionality. But really, what does tomorrow bring? And so we realize more and more data. FEMA is embarking on more and more, technology that's allowing us to do automated engineering and probabilistic floodplain modeling. That takes a lot of computer power and a lot of data storage. So, which is great, right? Because there's some data junkies out there that really like data. So FEMA's collecting all that, which is great because now we can feed it into dashboards and decision support tools to really, respond quickly to events. One of the things we have to keep in mind is we have both technical and non-technical, stakeholders out there. So really designing these tools is going to be important. And as technology continues to be enhanced, we can leverage that stuff. We can automate more data collection and basically helping to improve quality control of these products to get you the data that's really nice and clean and can make the most use out of. As 5G and internet capabilities continue to grow, I think so won't the tools capabilities and be able to crunch data and provide rich information to you, as well as storage costs still continue to go down, which is going to be important, right? Because a lot of this program it really does turn a lot of information. So being able to store that and have that available is important. And, something I know FEMA is continuously working on is being able to, connect these systems, right? We don't want these systems to be in silos. We want these data, sources to be able to talk to each other and interact. So basically being able to connect these systems is very important. So with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you for your time and open it up for Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Bradford. Looks like we've got some questions here in the chat window. We'll start with the first one here. Will the links to all these tools be provided in a handout? And it looks like Sarah's come in and said that we can download the presentation from the resources tab as well. But is there another place where we can get these?
You can email me. I'm happy to give you, a PDF version. But yeah, Sarah has the version. I've given it to her. So definitely want to make sure that that's available so you guys can click on those links and explore all those tools.
Okay, great. Yep, that'll be helpful. Is there a way to add in a function to the flood hazard viewer to turn the label layer off for printing? That way it's not as cluttered.
I'm not totally sure of that, but I can tell you what, I know in the following presentation, I know that's going to be covered more in depth. And if it's not covered, we'll make sure to get that answered, but we'll cover that in the Q&A.
Okay, thank you. Are the 34 downloadable data sets currently maintained?
I know sporadically the stuff is uploaded on there. I don't know the frequency, but I think it is data pulled from multiple, branches of government. But it is periodically updated. And I know, for example, the claims data, it's every couple months. They'll refresh that data set.
Okay.
So it's not too. It doesn't become that static. It is updated.
Thank you. The open data sets appear to be primarily categorized at the state level. Are there plans to distill the data down to the local, county, or community level for information on local mitigation projects?
I do not know that answer. I can take that and note that. I would say in some of the data sets I've downloaded, there are ways to filter the information. You still got to download it all, which again isn't the most convenient thing. But there is ways to filter the data, possibly in some of the data sets by CID or county FIPS that would be more manageable at a local level.
Okay. I know this probably isn't your area expertise, but does FEMA have a timeline or a plan to map all areas of the nation?
I don't want to speak on FEMA's behalf. It is on the radar. It's something that comes up on conversation. It's a massive program, and I think in the near future, we will see again regions, pushing to basically modernize everything to have digital data, and we can get rid of the paper maps once and for all. But it's in the works.
Thanks, Bradford. Yeah, that one's tough. How can community leaders collect data through these tool resources without a MIP login?
Yeah, I made sure that the presentation today was all publicly available, so you don't need a password for anything. There are, again, added functionality. If you do have passwords or do have the credentials, there's other tools available to you. So Brad, was the question on how to upload data or how to access certain data sets? I'm sorry.
I'm not exactly sure. I know they're discussing how to. It says collect data through these resources. I'm not sure if it's them downloading or uploading.
So the Frizzle, the Frizzle link that I gave, I know that's somewhat new still to people. That's kind of accessing the back end of the MIP, which for the longest time, unless you had a MIP login, you couldn't really get that data. So now it's available. You can search it and then just download it straight to your desktop.
So you can get onto the MIP and use the Frizzle tool.
Yeah, there are certain pieces of the MIP. If you just Google in the MIP, we will get to. There is some tool functionality without even needing a password, the username and password.
Okay, great, thanks. And the last one we've got here. Do you know why CHAMP and WHAFIS, I'm not sure how to say that, is still not available for download from the new FEMA website?
CHAMP, I'm going to say that's coastal modeling.
I think it's coastal. Yeah, it's
yeah. So that is in the works. FEMA.gov. We are right now reviewing the acceptable model list to get that republished. And that's some of the discussion that's going on is how we can possibly host those models that FEMA has kind of overseen over the years, or again, just make it very easy for folks, whether it's USGS, hosting the model, but really just making that new FEMA.gov site for the acceptable model list easy for all folks. So I have heard that comment before. It has been voiced. So hopefully we can work with the FEMA web team and get that uploaded for download.
Okay. Well, that looks like all the questions we've got. I think we'll, I guess, move on to the next one. Thanks, Bradford. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Okay. Our next presenter is Daniel Horner. He's going to be discussing viewing best available flood hazard data for a location and creating a report on proposed changes. Mr. Horner's CFM has been working in floodplain management for 15 years and developing tools and processes such as the MAP Service Center and its viewers and tools. Take it away, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the conversation. We'll be talking about viewing best available flood hazard data for a location and creating a report on proposed changes. My name's Dan Horner. I work for NiyamIT. We've been serving the National Flood Insurance Program for about 15 years. and currently part of the Customer and Data Services project, FEMA's Risk Map program. So for finding best available flood hazard data, we'll talk through some tools and some processes as on screen here. So finding and viewing effective flood hazard information, getting a little bit more familiar with the Map Service Center and creating a subscription there, finding engineering data in FEMA's library, locating those proposed changes that I talked about and creating that report, researching flood study project status, and viewing draft flood hazard information. The flood hazard information moves through some life stages in the risk map program. For those of you not familiar, draft, preliminary, pending, and then effective. And we'll walk through how to find data for each of those life stages in this presentation. And for any of them, you can just search by address in one of FEMA's available tools. And these tools can help you to accomplish some common tasks in your day-to-day workflow, like property lookup, development proposals, requests for information, solicitation of views, and community assistance visits. So let's first look at finding and viewing effective flood hazard information. Hopefully everyone's familiar with FEMA's Map Service Center. If not, the URL is on the screen, msc.fema.gov. You can find flood hazard information just by entering an address. There's a single search bar right on the homepage, enter coordinates, an area of interest, and that will advance you to the address search results page, which you can view effective flood hazard information right in the map viewer. This displays the data from FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer, which includes revision areas. Above the map, you can also create, it's called a dynamic map, which is an NFHL format. It's a print-sized map, or download the larger effective flood map, that flood insurance rate map. In the address search, you can also find the letters of map change for the location. And you can also advance on the right side, just above the map, to search all products to find additional products for the location, historic maps, flood risk products, and so on. You can also view FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer in the National Flood Hazard Layer viewer. URLs on screen here, same intro, mscfema.gov/NFHL for National Flood Hazard Layer. This is a little bit more robust of a viewer where you can still search by just entering an address or place, but you can also turn on and off layers. Maybe you want to turn off the levy lines, or you want to turn off the BFE lines, or turn on some layers that might be off by default to avoid some clutter in the viewer. Same data that appears in the Map Service Center address search viewer. And you can also interact with the map to click a point and pull up some attribute information. And you can also drop a pin to create an export from the NFHL, either that same print-sized NFHL format, like the dynamic map on the MSC site, or a full-sized firm export. And both of them are in PDF or PNG as options. And again, all of this NFHL data includes those letters of map revision already having revised the flood hazard boundaries or elevations, whatever might be in the revision, without the need to pull up that LOMAR document and have it next to your effective firm panel. Here's an example of the NFHL full firm export. Pretty consistent with modern firm panel graphic specifications, all of the standardized modern symbology in the firm template. It includes a full color base map from the USGS national map, legend, title block, effective date, all the information necessary to conduct official business. Let's look a little bit more at the Map Service Center and the subscription option. So you may want to answer the question perhaps you have for yourself or somebody you're working with in your jurisdiction or community official. What products have been issued for my jurisdiction? And in answering that question, the MSU subscription is also useful for for tracking LOMAC issuance, which can be frequent in some locations, or just wanting to be able to acquire the latest GIS data. So maybe you can have it in your own application, your own site, whatever it might be. And that's because you can subscribe to the Map Service Center for any product for any location. So we'll walk through how we do that. So the first step is to look for the MSC email subscriptions on the left side of the page. Sorry, went forward there by accident. Thanks. And that's on the left-hand nav. You can see the arrow on the screen, and you can create an account with just an email address and a password. Once you get there, you'll see these options that are on screen, and we've numbered the steps for you to make it a little bit easier for you. First, select how often that you want to be emailed. So you can choose between daily, weekly, monthly. Some products are issued about every day, like the LOMAC that we talked about, or products as they come out on their effective date. But maybe daily is a little too frequent. You'd rather just maybe get the GIS data updated once per month. You can select your area of interest, starting at region, going down to state, city, county, and then select the products that you're interested in. And you can create as many of these, what we call envelopes, as you like. So maybe you want one for all of Region 4, but then you want a second one just for Alabama, and then a third maybe just for Baldwin County as your interest changes across the various products that are available. Once you create the envelope and save it, you can immediately view recently posted subscribed products published in the last 45 days at the number 4 tab on the top of the screen. So you don't need to wait to get an email necessarily. And again, that's going to display all of the products that have been issued in the last 45 days for that or those envelopes that you created. Now we'll take a look at discovering engineering data files in FEMA's digital library. So a question that you may be asked or you may need to answer is, how was this base flood elevation determined for this location? And using the FEMA's mapping information platform, the Flood Risk Study Engineering Library, or what we lovingly call FRIZL, you can find study data there from 2006 to present. The FEMA Engineering Library, the older paper warehouse from decades past, has been digitized, so you can request pre-2006 data available by request. And this will allow you to conduct model lookups for analysis of flood hazards. To access the FRIZL on FEMA's mapping information platform, the MIP, the URL is on screen, and it's hazards.fema.gov. And then you can see there's a tools and links bar, and then the search engineering data bar. And you will end up on this screen here where you can enter a keyword search. So you can enter a geographic location, a CID, a case number, a type of data, and then of course you can narrow down your search using those filters that appear on the left side that kind of give you some tags in the data that returned, so you can maybe filter it down, as I did in this example on screen here. After typing in a community, I decided to narrow it down to just finding the H&H data. An important note is that H&H modeling data is made available after the project's letter of final determination date. So let's look at how we can find that proposed change data and create that change report. So again, you may be asked the question, how is this map changing for my house? Or how is this flood risk changed in these maps I've heard about, or these proposed maps? And you can view proposed map changes for that preliminary life stage in FEMA's flood map changes viewer. You can also view pending data. That's the data that is past that letter of final determination date, but hasn't reached the effective date yet. You can also view changes since last firm, which is a comparison of the effective data, that FEMA National Flood Hazard Layer, and preliminary digital data, and create a report comparing the two. So a mouthful there, right? All in one viewer. Let's take a closer look at it. So the FEMA's flood map changes viewer is available at msc.fema.gov. URL is again on screen. You can see there, and we have a lot more colors than the National Flood Hazard Layer viewer, which has only the red, right? Showing your NFHL coverage, your effective data coverage. And that's because that purple is the preliminary and the blue is the pending. And as I said with it, when you find that preliminary data with the effective information, you can see that a comparison layer has already been automatically processed and shown in the viewer. And you can, just like the other viewer, the NFHL viewer in this flood map changes viewer, you can just enter an address or place and it will zoom you into that area of interest, or of course, manually zoom in and pan around. In this particular image, we're showing the effective data, the preliminary data, kind of on top of one another, and then that change layer, the yellow showing the flood hazard proposed increases, and the purple showing those proposed decreases. In the FMCV, the flood map changes viewer, we call it FMCV. You can interact with the map, so you can click on it to pull up information. Here you can see the current effective flood zone and the proposed new flood zone in the pop-up, and kind of 2 screenshots here to show you can scroll down in that toolbar that pops up, or that pop-up, and you can actually export that CSLF data set. There's a widget in the FMCV where you can place a pin. It was up in the first screenshot, and you see it on the screen again here. And when you select that pin icon, the left one, and place it in the map and click run, it will create a comparison report for the location that shows these multiple layers in an easy to read side-by-side report. Here's an example of it on screen here. So you can see the side-by-side effective versus preliminary data for the location, proposed change details like zones, map dates, depths, vertical datums when they're applicable. So it's a pretty effective tool for communicating proposed map changes for a given location. And this again is a print-sized 8.5 by 11 export. One last thing to talk about in the flood map changes viewer. I know there's a lot going on with this tool. I encourage you to go to that msc.fema.gov/FMCV and play around with it. But on this screenshot here, I just show that you can add other information available in ArcGIS Online. These are all ArcGIS Online viewers, the Esri Powerhouse viewers. And here I just added the hurricane evacuation routes, the purple line that appears on screen. And there's dozens, likely hundreds nowadays of other data sets that you can bring up to show alongside these other data services that we already walked through that are in this FEMA viewer. So let's talk about how we could look at flood study project status. So you may be asked a question or have it rolling around in your mind, what's the status of that FEMA flood study project for my area or this area of interest? And there's something called FEMA's study tracker map that you can use to find details for any ongoing MIP project. Again, that's that mapping information platform, that application that's used to manage and track FEMA's flood study projects. Same MIP URL as before, hazards.fema.gov. We're going to go to the tools and links bar or option on that top gray bar one more time. And now on the right side, you can see in the top right, there is the study tracker map. Some of you may have gone here before to get to the Google Earth downloads, or maybe to find the URL services for the GIS options in the top right, but the study tracker map is that third one down. So using the study tracker map, again, you can enter an address or place, and it will zoom you right into the location. And you can interact with the map to pull up project details. In this example here, I pulled up a preliminary purchase with a projected preliminary issuance date. And you can see the various project statuses that you can see on the left side from the project has advanced to post-preliminary phase. Perhaps there's outreach activities ongoing. Maybe they're in the preliminary phase, is this one I interacted with? Or perhaps they're still putting together data and it's in the data development phase, or even earlier than that in the discovery phase. And again, this entire nation is populated. Just a quick note, the national view doesn't come up when the map loads, showing the thousands of study projects going on and features at the same time. So you will want to zoom into your location of interest to get the data to render and then begin the interaction process. And the last life stage, it might seem a little odd that we are going more backwards to forwards, but I wanted to try to go from the common to the less common. That's viewing that draft flood hazard information. And this is going to be before preliminary. So again, just real quickly, we talked about finding that effective flood hazard information, the most common data points that we're looking for. Then we talked about data that's about to become effective or preliminary. And this is that earlier stage, even prior to that, prior to preliminary, when draft data has been produced. This is in its own viewer. And again, a common URL string, msc.fema.gov/draft this time. It will take you to this, again, an ArcGIS online viewer. And in this one here, there are purple polygons that if you maybe squint real closely on the PowerPoint here, you can see some of those areas with draft data sets. But again, just like any other viewer, you can put in an address or place or coordinates and it'll zoom you to the area of interest. And then you can see, do you have draft information in this location? Much like FMCV, this does a few similar things. And one of the first is it shows the national flood hazard information alongside the draft information. It also automatically creates and shows in the viewer draft changes since last firm information. Much the same way, yellow for SFHA increases, purple for decreases, I should say flood hazard risk increases and decreases. And in draft, you'll see these polka dots. This is a differentiator, right? Making sure we know that we're not looking at effective national flood hazard information or the preliminary. And once again, you can click on the map to bring up this pop-up, which shows you some kind of before and after risk information, and then scrolling down, as I did here in this screenshot, to be able to export that draft CSLF data. Easy for me to say. So we have documented some needs for future updates. We know that we can improve the study tracker map to show progress to completion and upcoming milestone information. It is in a little bit of an infant stage, even though it's been around for a couple of years. So if you have any other thoughts on how the study tracker could be improved, we'd like to hear about it. My email address is at the top of this presentation, and let us know how it could be improved. We'd like to make sure that folks have as much exposure to those flood study statuses as possible. And if we can up the usability, we'd like to hear about it. We have also been told before, ideally, we would connect the file repositories, right? Those H&H files that you may want directly to the viewer, right? So as we're interacting with a BFE line, we could download the models associated with it. That's another need, IT system need that has been logged. But if there's any other changes that could be made to make these more usable for you or to help you to accomplish your day-to-day work, please stop by the booth to talk about these things, or again, use my email address as I had up on the earlier slide to let us know. I wanted to recap some of the available resources and the tools specifically that I went through in this presentation. Again, that msc.fema.gov URL repeats throughout. So links to know, again, that msc.fema.gov/NFHL for the National Flood Hazard Layer Viewer. My favorite, the Flood Map Changes Viewer, that's showing your preliminary and your pending data, also your preliminary changes since last firm. And then the Draft Viewer, msc.fema.gov/draft. And then there are other tools available on the MSC. There's a products and tools page. There's an FAQ. And then we talked about the study tracker map. And I've just briefly mentioned the GIS services webpage for you GIS power users that are out there that might want the direct URL to any of these services that you saw in these viewers. So bringing in the prelim national layer, perhaps to your own application or website. Just wanted to thank you again for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Please stop by the NiyamIT booth. I'll be there to answer any questions as soon as this presentation ends. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for that, Daniel. I appreciate the presentation. Looks like we've got a few questions in here. So if you've got any others, feel free to enter them in the chat window. The first one, if a jurisdiction only has paper maps, will you have a dynamic map for that?
Good question. I want to talk about the Format Web tool, but I'm going to first answer a question that went to Bradford from the previous session. Hopefully that viewer's still on. The question was, can I look at these I think it was guided towards the NFHL data services, but really any of these without the labels on to avoid some clutter. Because they're map services, the answer in the current state is no. I will work with FEMA to log that need. We try to capture everything, make sure FEMA has eyes on it. For me, if it were me and I'm trying to work with a state or something smaller, I would probably go to the FEMA Map Service Center and download the state NFHL extract. And then I could do all of the feature manipulation I want, right? Make your flood zones whatever color you like and keep your labels on and off. And hopefully that state coverage is enough. For this question, in short, the answer is no. You can't make a dynamic map from the resources that I showed on screen earlier. However, there is, we just actually deployed it on March 12th, a new, what they call format web, or the ability to pull up those unmodernized maps and then make a print size version of it. So you're not going to have that dynamic USGS base map, all of the new symbology from geospatial data, but there is at least a way to make a print size version of those unmodernized maps.
Great. Thanks. Next one, in the NFHL viewer, turned off layers still show when creating the format. Is there a way to make it so the turned off layers don't show in the format when you print it?
No, that's intentional. FEMA had an expectation and continues to have an expectation, which is sound, that the typical features that you would see on a traditional published firm panel appear in those outputs as well. So we would want users to turn off BFEs and then it appear to not have elevations in that area, or turn off flood zones and it appear like unshaded X, because those unshaded, those areas of minimal flood hazard don't have any symbology or labeling in the modern specs. So that is a fixed set of outputs in both the dynamic map and the NFHL full print.
That makes sense. Thanks. In the study tracker map linked directly, is it linked directly to the Mars data? And how often is that updated?
No, it's not. It's actually, I should have put that as a need, or maybe I had something close to it in my kind of future enhancements that we're hoping to see. But yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be great beyond that to be able to click on a profile baseline or even a BFE in the NFHL and be able to end up with that, either that database record in Mars or that actual H&H, those HECRAS perhaps outputs. Right now, the study tracker map is not connected to either Frizzle or Mars, but I will say the data that appears in the study tracker is the same thing you would find in Mars, which is that MIP ad hoc reporting system output. So it's the same study data. This is just a geospatial representation of MIP study data. Mars is like a tabular database dump of it.
Okay, great. Can any H&H model used in a FEMA study be downloaded from Frizzle?
The limitations are in the availability, which I said in the presentation, meaning that unless you are an authenticated user, if you're a public user, you can access the H&H once the study hits the LFD date, as I said in the video. Then the question is, how far back does this go, right? When was this system being used to capture that data? There's no real firm start date to that. I would say I started to see consistency in the mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, thereabouts, and even more likely as you got closer to 2010. And obviously since then, it's been pretty consistent. Anything that you don't find in that Frizzle resource, you would use your traditional engineering library outreach. And in fact, you can even use FEMA's engineering library if you're looking at Frizzle and you just happen to be a little scrambled up, because there's a lot of detailed data there, and the FEMA's engineering library is still staffed, even though it's all digital, with a lot of the same amazing experts with decades of experience to help you kind of decipher everything you're looking at. So always feel free to use that resource.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's nice. Does the preliminary and pending data include non-regulatory products like the BLE?
No, it does not. The preliminary and pending data that was shown here is only those firm databases. So I say no because I think that's probably the answer to your question, but there is a chance that some base level engineering data was issued. It was used as best available for a certain period of time, and then it was converted into that firm database schema. But in order for it to end up in these national layer data warehouses and in these services, it must conform to that firm database schema. That's your red or green firm rectangles and the normal squiggly BFE lines and a certain way of classifying your flood zones and your flood zone subtypes. So it must conform to that to end up in these locations. There is BLE data that can be discovered in the MIP if it, again, meets certain triggers along the way. And you could also always reach out to the engineering library for that as well.
Great. Let's see. Thanks for the updates to the Fermat tool. It's just a comment from Jamie. It says much easier to use, so very good. And is there a fact sheet on how to set up an account on the Frizzle? Again, how I guess it's a how do you get into it? I guess.
Yeah. So if I'm actually not a MIP authentication expert, but you would want to go to that that MIP page, that hazards.fema.gov, and look for a contact us somewhere in there. And that's when you can reach out to that help desk to ask for an account to be created. There's limitations because there is some data that is private, quite literally. So it's not full public exposure, which is why some products are available at certain times and other products are available to a wider audience. And if it's determined, again, that you don't meet the criteria to have an account to kind of get all that behind the scenes case information, your engineering library, once again, is the best candidate because they have full access and they can parse out the information that you specifically need to keep all that information that we want to, keep away from public users, and kind of parse out exactly what you need for your particular project.
Okay. That's great. And I forgot one actually of my own. I know I used the Google Earth flood map viewer, those products. And since Google Earth was discontinued, is the future for that kind of product the map viewer that's on the MSC, or is that going somewhere else?
Did Google Earth get discontinued? Did Google stop using Google Earth? Because
they've stopped updating it.
Okay. We actually still offer up the WMS that the KMZ files ingest. And that data is still regularly updated. So the files and services that we have exposed for users to bring into Google Earth has not changed because Google has made any changes. We thought about it and talked about it with FEMA about 3 years back because we felt like it was antiquated and we should shift towards a different direction. But there's a very dedicated group of passionate users of Google Earth. Exactly. Brad is one of them. In fact, this ASFPM community was also a vocal audience to it too. So left it on, everything's turned on. It has all the same symbology as you would find through any of these other map services. And there are no plans for it to be taken down anytime soon. So continue to use it. I guess it's got the parcel data, right? The parcel data outlines is one of the big assets for using Google Earth.
Yeah, excellent. I appreciate it, Daniel. It looks like that's the last question, so I think we'll move on. Thanks, you,
Brad.
All right, our next presenter is David Mummert. He's going to be presenting on the eLOMA. It's a collaborative tool for licensed professionals, communities, and FEMA. Mr. Mummert's an environmental scientist with 19 years of NFIP experience who currently supports the eLOMA and MT1 process. David, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Mummert. I'm the eLOMA coordinator for all 10 FEMA regions. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the eLOMA tool. Just the agenda for today's presentation, we're going to start out with a summary of what eLOMA is and what the benefits are. We'll take a look at how someone that's interested in using eLOMA can create an account, and then some tool navigation. We'll discuss the eLOMA audits, which are always a popular point of discussion. We'll go over some of the enhancements that are planned for eLOMA and some of the improvements that we'd like to make to the tool. We'll discuss the eLOMA super user status, which is a very important part of the eLOMA tool and the process moving forward. And we'll also talk about how eLOMA and affects floodplain managers and what floodplain managers can do to help FEMA with the eLOMA process. So just a little background on a letter of map amendment, or a LOMA. A LOMA determination is a letter from FEMA that states that a structure or a parcel of land is above the base flood elevation, and therefore the flood insurance purchase requirement isn't there. So they don't have to buy flood insurance for that structure. The lender still can require flood insurance if they want. We don't see that happen very often, but Apparently it does happen from time to time. And the only option there, I think, is to find another lender if they were to do that, if they were to accept that LOMA determination. So what is eLOMA and who can use it? So eLOMA tool is in FEMA's mapping information platform website. And the eLOMA tool is a web-based system for licensed professionals, either licensed land surveyors or professional engineers, to submit those more simple letter of map amendment requests to FEMA. And the eLOMA tool, the eLOMA process, is designed to replace the traditional process of submitting LOMA applications to FEMA. So the way that the eLOMA tool makes the determination is it will compare the elevations that are submitted by the licensed professional. So if the subject of the eLOMA application is a structure, the licensed professional will enter in the lowest adjacent grade of that structure. If the subject of the application is the entire lot or a portion of meets and bounds portion of that property, they'll enter in that lowest lot elevation. And then based on the BFE that's entered, the tool will compare the two and make the determination whether or not the subject can be removed from the special flood hazard area. And the eLOMA tool will also make sure that all the required information has been entered in its entirety and also in the format that FEMA needs it to be in. So some of the benefits of the eLOMA tool, it's quick and relatively easy. If a licensed professional submits the eLOMA application and it does not get audited, they can get that determination for their client in the time it takes for them to compile the supporting data and then enter in everything into the eLOMA tool. And in that situation where they're not audited, they can generate that final eLOMA determination letter and then provide it to their client, whether it be via email or actually printing a copy out and mailing it to them or something like that. But it's pretty quick and relatively easy. Everything is online. It's all in the mapping information platform website that FEMA has. And so the communication back and forth between the eLOMA users and the auditors is all handled electronically, either via email or in the eLOMA tool. Users can sign up to use the tool online, and if they need to renew their license information, that can all be done online. And they're also able to save applications that they've entered. If they need to come back to them at a later date, they can do that. Currently, the eLOMA process accepts the majority of LOMA application types. It's about 75%. We don't see that many come through using eLOMA, but if everyone used eLOMA that could, we'd see about 75% of them coming through. Everything's kept at a central location in the mapping information platform. So all of the supporting data that's uploaded by the licensed professionals, that's saved in the MIP. And the licensed professionals can see all of the required data that they've submitted. If they've had to make changes to some of that supporting data, they can see where they've made changes and saved updates. And there's no cost to the folks to use the eLOMA tool. I think it's important to note that it's possible that the licensed professional might charge a homeowner a fee to submit an eLOMA, but there's no cost from FEMA going to either the licensed professional or to a homeowner to use the tool. So some differences between the eLOMA process and the standard LOMA submission process. The eLOMA determination serves the same function as a LOMA application that was either submitted online using the online LOMAC tool, or if the homeowner submitted a paper application through the mail, the end result, that eLOMA determination, does the same as a LOMA determination that they might get through the other means. The online LOMAC tool and the paper forms are available to anyone. So a homeowner, a lender, anyone like that could submit one of those two ways. But the eLOMA tool can only be used by those licensed individuals, those surveyors and engineers. And getting a LOMA determination through the standard process, whether it be online LOMAC or the paper application forms takes anywhere from 30 to 60 days, whereas the eLOMA process, even if they're audited, is much quicker. And also with the eLOMA tool, there's really no need to print and mail anything. All the supporting data is uploaded into the MIP, and nothing needs to be mailed to FEMA in support of that eLOMA application. And at the end, the determination can be generated by the licensed professional and then provided in electronic format via email or EFTP site, something like that, to their client. So to get an account, if you're a licensed professional, you can navigate to the mapping information platform. You see the URL there. We call it the MIP for short. And at the very top, you can click on that Need an Account link, and it'll take you through the process of registering to use eLOMA. And as long as you have a valid license to be a surveyor or an engineer, all you have to do is enter in all the information. At the end of the process, you are signed up to use eLOMA. So for licensed professionals, they need to enter in all their individual specific information, anything pertinent to their license. If a user is licensed in multiple states, they can also enter that in. That way they could use eLOMA in more than one state. And at the end of the process, you need to do their little test there to make sure the system knows you're not a robot or something like that. That's all pretty straightforward. There is another way to be able to use eLOMA if you're not a surveyor and engineer, and that is to become a National Flood Association certified professional. So this was a program that was set up between the National Flood Association and FEMA so that their users could use the eLOMA tool and not be licensed as a surveyor and engineer. There are some requirements. They need to be CFMs, and those certified professionals, they're not actually certifying any elevations. They still need to get a surveyor and engineer to provide certified elevations on an elevation certificate or an elevation form, and then submit those with the supporting data online. But by signing up through the NFA, they can use the tool and then submit those elevations from that certified surveyor or engineer. So this is just a screenshot of what you see when you go to the eLOMA homepage. It gives you the option to start a new eLOMA, and it also, you can get to your work item list or your workbench from this start page. Here's the screenshot of what the work item list works for. So when a licensed professional eLOMA user signs into their account in the MIP, and they go to their work item list, they can see applications that they've submitted that have an audit in progress. They can see applications that they've started and saved that haven't been submitted yet. They can see ones that have been completed, whether they're audited or not, or if they were completed without an audit. So it's just a good way for them to see what they've submitted, what they have in process, and also if they have something in process and an auditor needs additional information from them, they'll see that link there and give them more information about what needs to be submitted and what they need to do next to continue with the application. So the data that's required of the eLOMA licensed professional, when they get into the tool, one of the first things they need to do is enter in the legal property description. And this tends to be something that a lot of licensed professionals get hung up on because there's a very specific format that FEMA requires to be used for LOMA and eLOMA determination letters. And so entering in that legal property description can be a little tricky until they get the hang of it. They also enter in the requester information. So generally that's the property owner, the homeowner. They enter in the information about the community, the CID, map panel information. They enter in the latitude and longitude at the center of the subject. So the subject of the request is the residence on a property. The licensed professional should be entering in the latitude and longitude at that center of the property, or sorry, of the structure. They enter in the elevation information. So again, that's the lowest adjacent grade if the subject is a structure, lowest lot elevation if the subject is a property or a portion of property. There's some other information they need to enter about the subject. If there's, residence in a garage on the property, they enter that information in. So it's differentiated on the determination letter. And then they also enter in the BFE. And they have to indicate how they calculated the BFE, whether it was using the flood profile in the FIS report, or if it was a Zone A BFE, and they did a quick 2 or a HEC-RAS study. They enter in all that information so that FEMA knows exactly how they got the BFE before moving forward. So once a licensed professional submits an eLOMA, once they click that very last button, if the submittal isn't audited, they can immediately generate that eLOMA determination. So they generate it as a PDF, and they can save it locally, and they can print it out if they need to, or they can just email it to their client. If the application is flagged for audit, the licensed professional is notified. They'll see an on-screen notification, but they'll also get an email from the system that lets them know they're being audited. And since they've already uploaded all of the supporting data, they don't need to submit anything else at that point. At that point, the auditors in our group will review their information. If we need to request additional information or request clarification on something, we'll reach out directly to that licensed professional. And if not, we'll go ahead and complete the audit. Generally, the audits get approved. Sometimes they need some corrections or changes before they can get approved, but for the most part, they get approved. But sometimes they do get rejected. So one thing that we like to point out is every new user, once they've signed up to use eLOMA, they're audited on their very first try. And FEMA does this to make sure that those new users have an understanding of what's required of them, and particularly what's the requirements of the supporting data and all of the information that they need to enter for the application. So if it's approved, the licensed professional receives a notification email to log in and generate their final determination. And oftentimes, like I mentioned before, we need to make some changes or some corrections before we can approve the application. And so when we notify the licensed professional, our auditors will let them know exactly what needs to be changed and why. So then hopefully going forward, they'll know what to do in their subsequent applications. Once a licensed professional gets through an approved audit, they can still be subject to random audits or some other automatic audit triggers, but for the most part, they're going to be audited randomly after that. If their application is rejected, the submittal has to be transferred over to the standard LOMA process so that one of our LOMA analysts can review it. A number of different reasons why it might be rejected. Most of the times it's because the application didn't meet the criteria of using the LOMA process. So it would have had to go through the standard LOMA process anyway. So when our auditors start to review a submittal, we're looking to make sure that the firm or firmet is what we prefer. The firmet and the profile are annotated properly. We often have to work with licensed professionals to make sure they're doing that properly so we can see that they're, how they're determining the BFE. As I mentioned before, the legal property description must conform to that FEMA required format. It often takes licensed professionals a few tries to figure out how that needs to be written. And we also make sure that the elevations that are entered for the subject, whether it be the lowest adjacent grade or the lowest lot elevation, pardon me, are referenced to the same datum that are used on the firm and in the FIS report. We're also looking to make sure that the subject isn't in a B zone or a D zone, that no fill has been placed on the property, and that the eLOMA application isn't trying to change a previous LOMA or eLOMA determination. So the common errors that we find, mentioned a couple times before, it's important to note really, the legal property description needs to be in that FEMA required format. So we often have to make changes to that before we can approve the audit. If the subject elevations aren't in the same datum that is used on the effective firm and the effective FIS report, we have to make those changes. We often see the latitude and longitude coordinates that are entered do not correspond with the center of the subject, so we need to get clarification on that. The lot, block, and subdivision information, if it's not specific to the subject, and the firm panels are incorrect, or if the flooding source is incorrect, that tends to be a problem. So there are some limitations in the current eLOMA process. Mentioned before, if fill has been placed on the property, eLOMA cannot be used. If the subject is in an alluvial fan or a coastal high hazard area, a B zone, or a D zone, eLOMA cannot be used. eLOMA can't be used to make changes to a previous LOMA or eLOMA determination. So one of the things we've seen is if a licensed professional enters an eLOMA and it doesn't get audited, and then the next day or a week later they notice that they made a mistake, they're not supposed to be using eLOMA to correct that mistake. That needs to go through the standard process so that we can make sure that that new determination is correct and that it's properly superseding the incorrect determination. And there can be no conditional requests. So everything has to be based on existing structures or existing properties, no proposed structures. So some enhancements that have been made to the eLOMA tool, or what we'd like to make to the eLOMA tool, we'd like to introduce a workflow so it's easier for us to track the eLOMAs through the entire process, not only from the licensed professional side, but also from the FEMA side as the auditors review these. We'd like to users to be able to upload data throughout the process. They already can upload at the beginning, and if we have to request additional information, they can upload it or they can submit it via email to the auditors directly. We have added some quality checks and additional validation to the tool, but we'd like to add some more just to make sure that eLOMA determinations are being issued properly. And we'd like to improve the web-based training materials. And particularly for new users, we'd like them to be able to go through required training in the future. So some plans to expand the usage of the tool. Mentioned before, we'd like to update the training modules and implement that prerequisite training for new users. We're going to be developing some web-based learning opportunities for folks, whether they be new users or existing users that just want to brush up on the process. We're going to be adding some more quality checks and validation to the tool just to make sure we're getting accurate determinations out there. And we're going to be increasing the outreach by doing more of these presentations and by getting articles into newsletters around the country, get the word out there about the super users within the process, which we'll talk about here in a second. Hopefully getting more folks to be repeat users of the tool and really see the benefits of using the tool over the standard LOMA application process. So we mentioned this a couple times, the super user in the eLOMA process. So everyone that signs up to use the tool is what we call a default user. And there's a certain set of audit trigger criteria associated with them. But if we can get a licensed professional bumped up to the super user status, they don't get audited quite as often. And the way to get there is by demonstrating that they understand the process and that they know everything that's required of them. And once they can get eLOMAs through without requiring any corrections, they're eligible to be bumped up to that super user status. And they also need to use the tool on a regular basis. If they're only using it once a year, a couple times a year, it's really hard to get to get promoted up to that super user status. And we'd like to see them using it more often if they can. And here's some points about what it means to become a super user. Mentioned before, their audit frequency is reduced dramatically. They're not going to have as much oversight by FEMA, our auditors. They're not subjected to many of the automatic audit triggers that the default users are. And even when super users are audited, we try to get their audits turned around as fast as possible so that they can use the tool more often. And in this graphic here, it just shows some examples of super users and how often they get audited. So just 3 examples of super users that we currently have. And you can see during that time frame, they were audited all less than 30% of the time, whereas default users get audited the majority of the time, either because they're new or they don't use it very often, or we've had to make corrections to their applications, and so the tool automatically flags them. So as far as floodplain managers are concerned, we've gotten some comments before from floodplain managers that they're concerned that there might be eLOMAs issued in their communities that weren't audited, but that have errors. So some things we want to point out that even if an eLOMA gets issued without an audit, we do a cursory review to look for noticeable errors. And if we find them, we reach out to those licensed professionals to try to get them corrected. If need be, an incorrect eLOMA can be rescinded by FEMA and superseded by a new standard LOMA, but we try not to do that unless we absolutely have to. Most of the time, if we find an error in a non-audited eLOMA, we're able to contact that licensed professional and get that error fixed before they distribute that final determination letter. And to date, there really haven't been that many eLOMAs issued that required corrections. A new determination, pardon me, to correct that previous eLOMA. And so some ways here that floodplain managers can help FEMA with the eLOMA process. They can help promote the eLOMA tool to surveyors and engineers and homeowners in their communities. We often get asked if FEMA can provide a list of licensed professionals that can use eLOMA, and FEMA is not allowed to do that. So it's very helpful if the floodplain administrators, floodplain managers can help their constituents, those homeowners, find eLOMA users in their communities. It'd be a really big help if those floodplain managers can work with the licensed professionals in their communities to understand all the requirements of the eLOMA process. And that way we get more accurate determinations out there, and we don't have to go back and forth asking for additional information as often and that sort of thing. And it would also help if the floodplain managers would direct the property owners in their communities to use eLOMA. As I mentioned before, FEMA can't provide that sort of information. So the future of eLOMA, FEMA's goal is to increase the eLOMA use of the eLOMA tool. We'd like to be able to allow more requests to be processed using eLOMA. We'd like to increase the upfront training, particularly for new users, and the outreach efforts to all users. Improve the eLOMA process to make it faster and easier for all the licensed professionals. Save more time and resources for the property owners, the eLOMA users, and FEMA, and maintain the quick audit turnaround times for licensed professionals, which benefits the homeowners and the community officials. So if you have any questions, I will be available during the Q&A session after this presentation has played. My email address is there. Also listed the FEMA website URL there, the mapping information or NIP website URL is there. I've also got the email address there for MIP help. So if you ever have any issues with the tool not working or problems in the mapping information platform website, MIP help is available. And you can also call the Mapping and Insurance Exchange at that 1877 number if you need help with the tool.
Thanks, David. We'll get right into questions here. With the LOMA program, will it change with risk rating 2.0?
No, the LOMA process and the eLOMA process will remain the same.
Okay, thank you. Do communities ever submit eLOMAs on behalf of residents?
Yes, there are a handful of eLOMA users that are city engineer or other folks like that that do submit on behalf of their constituents.
Okay, very good. Are there examples of properly written legal descriptions online? Are they typically legal descriptions that a surveyor would prepare?
So in the eLOMA tool, there is a link to the help text for the legal property descriptions, and it gives a step-by-step process of how to write the legal property description for an eLOMA. And then it also gives a bunch of examples. I think the main issue that people run into is they either copy the description verbatim from a deed, let's say, and the issue there is the formats in deeds around the country vary so much. FEMA wanted there to be a singular sort of format for these descriptions that show up on the LOMA and eLOMA determinations.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you. If this is electronic, how does it get linked with the MSC products that show all the available products for a firm? Is there a link to the eLOMA, or is a PDF generated and linked there?
So what happens is when a licensed professional generates that final determination letter, it's not immediately uploaded to the MSC, but the current process is, I think it's a weekly batch upload. And so the LOMA point will show up the very next day, I believe, or maybe 2 days later, that you see in the NFHL. But the link to that actual determination letter won't show up probably till the end of the week.
Okay, great. But it is linked on there as the PDF of the form that what you would normally, okay.
Yep, it would show up just like your LOMA would that was issued by the MT1 group.
Great, perfect. For BLE studies options A through C, the SFHA is zone A, but for option D, the BLE, the engineer can determine if it's zone A or zone AE. Are the 1% elevations from the model-backed zone A studies being used for LOMA determinations if the elevations aren't published?
They are being used by the MT1 group for LOMAs, not for eLOMAs. So the difference there is if the subject property or structure for an eLOMA is in an unnumbered A zone, the licensed professional has to provide a BFE, and the BLE data isn't currently accepted for those. It'd have to be either a quick 2 or even a HECRAS study, or if the state that they're in has a tool where they can kind of click and grab BFE data. Those are accepted for eLOMAs, but the BLEs aren't currently.
Okay, thank you. Do you have like an average time saved for using the eLOMA versus like the regular process?
Well, the standard LOMA process is about 30 to 60 days. We're currently at about 35 days once we receive all of that information. And for an eLOMA audit, or an eLOMA, if it's audited, we turn those around within 5 business days. And oftentimes it's faster than that. And the only reason it might go longer than that is if we have to ask for additional data or get clarification on certain things, like they have that back and forth. But generally we're running about 2 to 3 days for eLOMAs that are audited.
Wow. Okay. That's great. Looks like we're out of questions. So I'm going to just say appreciate it, David. Thank you and all the presenters for putting these presentations together and for sharing your knowledge. Also tonight at 5:30 Central Time, that's about half an hour, there's going to be a trivia contest online through the conference. You can log into the Zoom there on the conference website, but it's limited to the first 200. So if you're interested, get there early. Have a great evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks very much.